I think most people listening likely associate seizures with one very specific type of seizure. And that seizure type is called a generalized tonic-clonic seizure. These used to be called grand mal seizures, so that terminology might be familiar to some people. These are the kind that you see on TV, where somebody might collapse and is unconscious, and then they have a rhythmic jerking of especially the large muscles of their body. They'll be kind of rigid and then have muscle convulsions. They might bite their tongue during this process. They might have loss of bladder or bowel function because of autonomic nervous system involvement. And then usually when they wake up, they have a period of confusion where they're not quite sure what's going on, and this might take some time to resolve. That is one type of seizure, but it is just one. And there are so many more than that. And that makes sense since now we know that any part of the brain can be affected. So let's get into how we can classify seizures. We define seizures first from their point of origin. So like I said before, seizures can be focal, which means they start from one part, one hemisphere, and one little part of the brain. Don't ask me how little, Erin. Just like one area of the brain.
Okay.
Or they can be generalized, meaning that they're starting at onset from both hemispheres of the brain. And a lot of times we actually don't know. We don't know necessarily what that pinpoint origin is. And so then these seizures are classified as unknown origin. And then we can further classify them by what signs and symptoms we see after that. Then, to further break this down, there are also motor and non-motor seizures. So motor seizures have like physical skeletal muscle involvement. So moving of usually the extremities or something in some way. This can look like spasms. It can be like a hyperkinetic or a myoclonic, like stiffening and tightening of muscles. It could be a tightening and relaxing very rapidly, which is what results in that tonic-clonic description. That's what tonic-clonic means. It's alternating between tensing and relaxing of muscles with this like jerking motion. It could also be much smaller twitches of muscles, just say of the hand or the face. Or it could also be a sudden weakness. So rather than a tension of muscles, it could be a sudden flaccidity of muscles. And that's all just within motor seizures. It could also have none of that and be a non-motor seizure, which could have a huge variety of symptoms. It could have cognitive symptoms like just a blank stare, where people just suddenly like have no emotion on their face. It is a blank stare and is unresponsive. It could be sensory symptoms that might even be something that people are feeling or are aware of, sudden sensory changes. Or it could be a complete loss of activity all of a sudden, which is called behavioral arrest, where someone just suddenly stops exactly what they're doing. And a whole bunch of other things even within that. And when we especially talk about focal seizures, this is not true for generalized seizures, but then the third step that we have to look at is whether awareness is intact or impaired. So because a focal seizure happens in only one part of the brain, someone may or may not know and be aware that they're having a seizure at the time that they're having it. And so we say that their awareness is either impaired or intact. With generalized seizures, awareness is not intact because it's happening in both hemispheres of your brain at the same time. But a lot of times people do have like prodromes or what we call auras prior to a seizure, so they might know that one is coming. And before you ask, because I know you're going to have a million questions.
I do. You could already see one on my face.
Yep, I can. All of these different seizure types are not mutually exclusive. Different types of epilepsy, or even a single seizure episode, can have multiple of these forms within them. So for example, something could start as a focal seizure, but could then generalize and become bilateral, and then end with something that looks like a generalized tonic-clonic seizure. Or people could have different foci of seizures throughout their brain that result in, throughout their lifetime, having seizures of multiple types or multiple forms. And my last important note before I let you ask questions that I hope I can answer is that one of the things that's very important to know about seizures is that these are brief episodes. These are brief episodes of this intense neuronal activity. And when I say brief, I mean on the order of seconds to 1 to 2 minutes. Because any seizure lasting more than 5 minutes, or if you have multiple seizures happening within a short time frame where someone does not return to full consciousness in between, that results in something known as status epilepticus and is a major medical emergency. We thought, I think, for a long time in the kind of history of epilepsy that it was 20 or 30 minutes before this became an emergency, but it's not. If seizures are happening for 5 minutes straight, that's a medical emergency because there's so much brain activity that can result in long-lasting damage.